Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Thursday, May 30th, 2013. We're almost into June here. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. A lot of stuff to talk about today. Manny is in our control room, twiddling the dials, ready to answer the phone when you call into 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. A lot of stuff in the news today. Stock market is up. Huge volume at the open, shoving it up. The European markets started low, then middle of the day, huge upshove. They ended in the green. Asian markets, completely different story. They continue to get hammered, especially the Nikkei in Japan. Doesn't look like they're going to be able to hold that together very much longer. Now, turning to Triplegate, or I guess it's up to Quintgate now, because Fast and Furious is coming back to haunt Obama with Benghazi Gate, which is the big one, IRS Gate, DOJ Gate, EPA Gate. It's all starting to engulf him, which is why he's in this panic to cause some kind of a distraction, a war. Let's nuke somebody. I don't care who anymore. Nuke somebody. I need a media distraction. And apparently it's now coming out that the Internal Revenue Service timed the admission of these targetings of conservative groups to occur after the 2012 election. They couldn't keep it completely secret. It was starting to come out, so they were going to get ahead of the ball and admit it themselves. But they timed it to occur after the 2012 election so as to help Obama get elected. So this is clear politicalization of the decision-making over at the Internal Revenue Service. And again, we're into Nixon territory on this. Now, it's being reported that the latest emails that are being released to the congressional investigators absolutely confirm that this policy of targeting conservative groups and conservative organizations and political dissidents, the decision-making went all the way into Washington, D.C., and the White House staff was aware of it. Obama is still trying to pretend he had no idea what his people were doing. So this is known as the I'm totally stupid defense. And Nixon tried the same thing. I found out about it from the media, the same as everybody else. I accept the responsibility, but none of the blame. And it's amazing how much Obama's response to these scandals mirrors that of Richard Nixon, especially when you consider that it didn't work for Richard Nixon. He had to leave office. So Judge Napolitano was out there making the obvious comment about how this IRS and federal police and Department of Justice are just out there trying to chill these rallies, whether it's Tea Party or Occupy or any of these groups. They're trying to just intimidate them. It's a campaign of political intimidation. And that is not how democracy is supposed to work. That's not how a republic is supposed to work. That's dictatorship. When you use the instruments of government, which technically are the property of the people, for your own political gain. Now, the good news is the American Center for Law and Justice has already filed a major lawsuit on behalf of 25 conservative organizations in federal court against the Internal Revenue Service and Attorney General Holder. This could very easily go class action, and if it does, I think anybody who is out there who has been harassed and intimidated by the Internal Revenue Service ought to sign on to it. Try and work within the system one last time to correct these abuses. Of course, the downside is there were efforts to correct the abuses following Richard Nixon's misuse of the IRS. And obviously, here we are all these years later, and presidents still feel they have the right, if not the legal authority, to use these instruments of government for their own gain here. Now, speaking of the Internal Revenue Service, some interesting numbers have come out. Got to take a break for commercials. When we come back, I want to talk to you about these tax loopholes for the wealthy and how much they really cost the nation. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the corporate media is now reporting that the former commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service was visiting the Obama White House every 9 days, all during the period this targeting of conservative groups, Tea Party, Occupy, was going on. When you contrast that with the Bush administration, where the IRS commissioner hardly ever got invited to the White House, again, it shows clear lines of communication, motive, opportunity, means. And we're back to that old question. What did the president know and when did he know it? And we should not buy this "I am stupid" defense by Barack Obama, where he's out there saying he only heard about it from the media the same time as we did. It's supposed to be his job to manage the instruments of the federal government. His job is to execute the will of the Congress. That's why it's called the executive branch. And Obama getting up there and saying, "Hey, I'm clueless," does not get him off the hook. He is supposed to know. So whether complicit or incompetent, he deserves to get pink slipped. Either way, it's not going to get him off the hook to say, "I have no idea what's going on." Now, according to the Congressional Budget Office, these notorious tax loopholes for the 1% have cost the United States economy $12 trillion over the last decade. That's actually more money than is being spent on all the wars. And so it's, again, this is a classic fascist pattern. The tax burden is shoved onto the middle and lower classes. The rich get richer. And you're asked to pay for all the wars that are going to make them even more money. Such a deal. Now, the FBI is still pushing for their new guaranteed wiretap plan. They want Internet service providers and software providers to build in backdoors for government surveillance into all of everything that you're doing. And by the way, this is nothing new. Microsoft, years back, inadvertently released a beta version of their operating system to beta testers that still had what's called a symbol table embedded in the code, which is used for development. And people examining the symbol table in the executable discovered that there was a backdoor for the National Security Agency built into Microsoft's encryption infrastructure. And that's not the first time either. There was a huge scandal in Europe with a company called Crypto AG, which was selling a modern, updated version of the German Enigma machine. And their CEO was bribed by the NSA, huge amount of money, to put a backdoor inside their machines so the traffic could be read. At the end of World War II, the U.S. government and Britain made presents of captured German Enigma machines to all of their friends and allies, not telling them that they already knew how to read the messages off of those. Remember the data encryption standard? It included an innocuous little piece of data called the work reduction packet, which turned out to be your encryption key re-encrypted with a key that only the NSA had. So they didn't even have to try and decode the message. They'd take out that packet, look at your key, they had your message right there in the clear. Remember the Clipper chip? Remember key escrow, where they were going to have these huge, robust keys that were broken into two parts, and one agency would get one half of the key, and another agency would get the other half of the key, and both agencies would need a warrant to release the key. And it was all supposed to keep them on the up and up. And, of course, the dirty little secret there is if you had one half of the key, you could derive the other half of the key quite easily. So it's all about keeping the doors open on your communication. And here is the problem. You know there are all these cyber criminals who are out there that are basically left unmolested by the government because computer security is a big business and you will buy your anti-wizzo whatever for your computer to keep you safe from all the porn purveyors. And you know those cyber criminals will figure out these back doors the FBI wants to mandate into Internet service providers, browsers, email clients, and they will use them against you. So this new FBI wiretapping plan basically amounts to you have to prop the door open on your house so the FBI can come in and peek at your mail anytime they want to. And there's no guarantee that after the FBI comes and goes, there won't be somebody else coming in to peek at your private stuff with more nefarious intent. And nobody wants to address that issue. Every time, in fact, I'll give you another example. There was a time before where the FBI put out a piece of spyware called Magic Lantern that was installed on people's computers to loot their emails for the FBI to spy on. And computer criminals started crafting their malware to look like the Magic Lantern when it was scanned by the various virus software that was commercially available on the market. And I remember there was one of the spyware makers, and I can't remember which one it was, basically admitted, yeah, we ignored the FBI's Magic Lantern virus if we find it on your machine. Then they turned around and said, oh, no, we're not doing that. Really, no, we're not doing that. Because it was hugely damaging. But this is the way the government likes to operate. They don't care if you become the victim of cybercrime, as long as in their extreme paranoia of the American people, they can peek over their shoulder at everything that you're doing. Whether it's sharing cookie recipes with your relatives, sharing pictures of your brand new nephew with people who really don't want to look at it anyway because they've had 5,000 baby pictures emailed to them already this year. The government is paranoid. The government is afraid of you. And they don't care if their desire to have a window on your life opens you up to be the victim of more crime. Because you'll go out and you'll buy more antivirus software and security software, and that'll stimulate the economy. Instead of the broken window analogy, it's the broken computer analogy. Anyway. Now, Eric Holder is trying to get this scandal over the Department of Justice spying on the corporate media with a series of meetings. And they're closed door, off the record. And because of that, several U.S. media organizations are saying, we're not going to show up. We're not going to show up into a locked room where we can't say what we hear and have you threaten us or something like that. If you want a meeting with us to explain what's going on, it has to be on the record. So at a time when Obama most needed the corporate media as his loyal servant, he has succeeded in seriously angering them. And that's a good thing. Corporate media ought to be adversarial to the government. That's their traditional role, to be adversarial. Now, getting on to Benghazi, have you noticed with all the corporate media coverage about IRS Gate and DOJ Gate, Benghazi is kind of fading away a little bit. Remember what I was telling you the other day about the great secret versus the little secrets? There are little secrets that you can use to tarnish the opposing party, tarnish the opposing candidate, carry out your little political warfare inside Washington, D.C. And then there are the great secrets that are so bad and so evil and so black they could bring the whole government down, and nobody talks about those. Like the reason for the Watergate burglary. Nobody wanted that talked about. That's why Nixon had to resign. Didn't dare let those questions get asked. Even Nixon's worst enemies were working to protect that secret. Because they didn't want to lose the free ride they've got there in Sodom on the Potomac here. And in the current context, Benghazi is the great secret. And I'm not the only one who's saying so, because we're hearing now, and this is being reported in the corporate media, the Republican National Committee is seeking more documents on Benghazi, and they are specifically asking for emails and documents and communication between the U.S. State Department and President Obama's re-election campaign. In other words, the Republican National Committee is thinking exactly the same thing I have been thinking. This was a staged event to help Obama's re-election chances. And that's what they're digging out the evidence on right now. Now, they won't make it public because they don't want the government to come down because they're still making a lot of money off of it. What they may use is to blackmail the Democratic Party as a whole into throwing the 2016 race. And with an open door to the White House like that, I can understand why John McCain is over there in Syria right now grandstanding and keeping his name in the media. And even more frightening, this may explain why Michelle Bachmann is not going to run for her congressional office anymore. Can you picture in 2016 a McCain-Bachmann ticket? Could very well happen. Could very well happen. This is just speculation on my part, but I'll bet you somebody somewhere is thinking about that. Now everybody's making a big stink about all these new high-tech weapons that are being brought into Syria by Russia. And the latest word is they're already there. They are already there. And Assad has announced it, and Israel's very unhappy about it. And over in the Knesset, Tzaki Hanegbi is warning that these S-300 missiles in Syria could bring about a war. And this reveals something very bizarre about the Israeli mindset, because Israel's been bombing Syria left and right. Lebanon too. And that's not supposed to be a big deal. But Syria arming itself to defend against more Israel bombings, that could lead to war. I wonder if the Knesset is like on drugs. Are they maybe all on SSRIs? Is this why their decision-making is so completely bogus? I'm going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about what's going on down in Syria, with Russia having already started to deliver the advanced S-300 missile air defense system. And you need to remember, these are not offensive rockets. They are not surface-to-surface, fling across the border into other people's countries. It is an air defense system, roughly equivalent to the U.S. Patriot missile system. Supposedly it's a little more effective. And Israel was screaming, we're going to shoot down the transport planes, we're going to sink the ships. Too late. They're already there on the ground. And Israel's now saying, we will prevent the missile systems from operating. This is an implied threat over Israel's very sophisticated, acknowledged electronic warfare system. And the Russians are coming out and saying, well, the reality is they've never actually had a chance to try out against the S-300 in war, so it's anybody's guess what's going to happen should it come to open conflict. But we have this situation where Israel is literally starting to threaten Russia. And, of course, we understand why Israel feels comfortable doing that. If Russia starts to say, all right, we're going to slap Israel down, Israel's going to run to the United States government and say, you've got to throw your children into the fray because our Israeli children are really too precious. We're hearing the same thing out of the plans to invade Iran, where we have a consensus among Israeli leaders and various parasitic sycophants that it would be better for the United States to invade Iran. Yeah, from Israel's point of view, it would be better. Let's just use up those American kids. They're not worth anything anyway. Now, apparently, Russia's Pacific Fleet has now entered the Mediterranean. So there is a lot of hardware in the eastern Mediterranean, off the coast of Syria. Russia is continuing to send a major, unequivocal message that these wars of conquest, the dollarification of the resource-rich areas of the world, has gone on as far as Russia is going to let it go. This is a very credible threat. It's a credible deterrent. My hat is off to Putin. He's the only one acting like an adult in this situation. He's trying to keep it all calmed down. So, anyway. Now, the United States yesterday started talking about establishing a no-fly zone over Syria. This is an act of war, by the way. There is no legal mandate. The United Nations can't go in and say, we're going to change the rules of your country. Countries are still sovereign. And so this no-fly zone, it's basically a euphemism for taking control of another nation's sovereign airspace. To tell that nation, this plane can go flying off to where it's going, but these planes can't. And we know what happens when the United States declares a no-fly zone. It is a prelude to an invasion. It's basically keeping the skies free of Syrian warplanes, so Israeli and U.S. warplanes can just go in and bomb whatever they want and skedaddle back out and laugh themselves silly over how easy it all is. Now, Hezbollah fighters are coming into Syria from Lebanon, and they are joining Assad's forces. And apparently they've already scored a major victory in the town of Qusayr. And they've gone in and they've taken control of this town, and they've kicked these hired mercenaries out. And the hired mercenaries are saying, Hezbollah is invading Syria. No, Hezbollah is coming to the aid of Syria. It's the hired mercenaries who are invading Syria. And it shows you how completely through the looking glass all this propaganda is, where these hired mercenaries, the Free Syria Army, 95% of them are not Syrian, and they're still trying to pose and posture that they represent the people and the welfare of the nation of Syria. And they absolutely do not. Now, getting onto this issue of chemical weapons, you've been hearing Israel and the United States scream that Assad has chemical weapons. We know it. We don't care what the United Nations found. We don't care that there's no evidence. We looked into Miss Cleo's crystal ball, and it's in the swirling smoke and fog. We saw Assad sitting in his home personally building chemical weapons. We know they're there. Same crap that we're giving us about Saddam Hussein. Now, Turkey raided a safe house being used by some of these al-Nusra Front, which is supposed to be the group that is currently in charge of this ragtag hired mercenary army. And what they do is they'll go into Syria, carry out an attack, go back into Turkey, and sort of hide out for a while. And Turkey raided one of their safe houses because of a link to some bombings that happened within Turkey itself, and they found sarin gas. This confirms that the only chemical weapons in Syria right now are in the hands of the hired mercenary army. Turkey says they have no idea how these al-Nusra mercenaries got the sarin gas. I'll bet we can all guess. We know the United States was openly talking months ago about staging a fake chemical weapons attack to blame on Assad. Looks like Turkey stumbled over the resource they were going to use for that. We're going to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about what's going on over in the Middle East here. Jordan is apparently starting to hold their own military drills to prepare for a possible intervention in Syria. They're all ganging up. And apparently they're organizing something like 15,000 soldiers from 18 different countries to take part in Eager Lion 2013. So this is going to be an exercise for troops from Britain, Bahrain, Canada, Czech Republic. Israel will not take part in the drill. They're going to stand off to one side in their little short skirt and their pom-pom going, go, kill, go, kill, go, kill. But they're going to continue their red line policy against arms shipments to Hezbollah. Well, too late there. As I mentioned earlier, the Free Syria Army is now crying that Hezbollah fighters are invading Syria. No, they're not. They're coming to Syria's aid. Now, as I mentioned before, Israel and U.S. generals draw up theoretical scenario for attack on Iran. This is being reported in a number of outlets here, and basically all comes down to the same thing. They have concluded it is preferable that America invade Iran rather than Israel. Because, after all, those Israeli children are far too precious and special to risk in a war of invasion. That's what the Americans are for. We're going to use the Americans for the invasion. Canada is showing its ire for Iran. They're freezing all trade with Iran. This is a major, major setback for Iran, because I don't know where they're going to go for hockey sticks and maple sugar now. Meanwhile, over in the occupied West Bank, there is an escalating campaign of arson committed by the Jewish settlers against the Palestinian villages. And it's becoming more and more intense because apparently when the fire department shows up to try and put the fire out, they are being blockaded by the Israeli occupation forces. So the campaign against the Palestinians also continues to escalate, and the United Nations sits there doing absolutely nothing about it. There's an interesting article that we linked to whatreallyhappened.com, The 7 Truths Inconvenient to U.S. Foreign Policy. I'm going to read you just one example from that, and I encourage you to go and look at this story here. And I remember when this actually hit the media, and I was doing a, oh, come on now, in response to it. This is when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, when they were trying to justify going into Libya to smash its gold dinar, to crush its state central bank, force a private central bank on them, get rid of that pesky gold dinar that everybody was so enthusiastic about, and of course to kill Gaddafi himself. And one of the pieces of propaganda they put out there was that Gaddafi was encouraging his Libyan soldiers to go on a campaign of rape against women and girls and dogs and sheep and whoever else, even to the point where Hillary Clinton was actually telling the corporate media that Gaddafi was issuing Viagra to his troops so they could rape more. And the corporate media just reported it as news. Didn't ask any questions, didn't double check. Amnesty International went in there and said, it's nonsense. It's complete, utter nonsense. They were unable to locate any victims of a so-called official Libyan government rape campaign. They couldn't even find anybody who claimed to know a victim of this. And if you go and read this article about these 7 truths, it's just a reminder. Everything that you are getting from the government and the corporate media in favor of war and conquest, it is outright lie. Remember what Senator Hiram Johnson said. Truth is the first casualty of war. Going to go to the phones here. We've got Jerry in Chicago. Aloha, Jerry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, thank you very much for taking my call, Michael. I love your show. You're very informative. I got a question for you, and my mother just asked me this yesterday. She was at her senior club and talking to a couple of the other seniors, and they said they got something in the mail from the IRS asking them specific questions about their religious beliefs and things like that. Have you ever heard of anything like this? I just heard it yesterday.
I have never heard anything like that, and I can't even imagine why the Internal Revenue Service would be asking questions like that, unless this senior club was applying for a 501c3 status.
I don't believe they would be applying for a 501c3 status. From what I've gathered from her, the only thing I could think of is it makes the targeting of certain individuals in this country a little bit easier after you're hearing what's going on with the military and Christianity and everything like that.
Well, again, because of the First Amendment, we're not supposed to have an official state religion. And, yeah, that's very bizarre. Is there a way that you could get me an actual copy of one of these letters? I'd like to look at it and post it online because it does ask a very serious question. What business is it of the IRS what your religion is or if you have no religion? It's very, very alarming if this is true.
Mike, I said the same thing to my mother. What the heck business is it of theirs to ask you anything like that? And she couldn't answer that. And she says, well, this is what the other ladies and men at the senior center were saying that they recently got. And I says, well, let me know when you get one because I'd like to have a copy of it. And I'll send you one if I can get one.
Yeah, if you get a copy, just scan it and send it to me. That's very, very alarming. We understand that with this current IRS scandal, with regard to the various conservative groups, the IRS was asking very inappropriate probing questions, even down to, grilling people about the interns who work for them and what their political views were. This is completely inappropriate for the IRS to be asking at this point.
Anybody to be asking, to be honestly, but like I said, I just heard this yesterday, and my mother is 89 years old, but she's got her full wits about her and everything, still drives and still does her own banking and grocery shopping and cooking and everything else like that. She's very independent, so I know she's not flipping her lid telling me this stuff. So, no, but I figured I'd run it by you because if anybody knew, I thought you would. So,
this is the first I've heard of it. Yeah, this is the first I've heard of it, but if you get a copy of that actual letter from the IRS asking for people's religious affiliations, I mean, in theory, that would be more along the lines of the Census Bureau, but under the Constitution, the Census Bureau isn't even supposed to ask your religion. It's there to simply enumerate the population for the drawing of congressional districts, and that's its entire constitutional mandate.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, for taking my call. Love your show.
All right. Thank you very much there. Now, I want to get back on down to this very ugly incident that happened down in Florida, where a friend of accused Boston bomber Tamerlan Tsarnaev was being interviewed by the FBI. He was interviewed a couple of times. Nothing went wrong. Then the FBI went back to interview him again at midnight. Guy's name was Ibrahim Todashev. Now, the FBI's original story was that he was on the verge of confessing involvement with this triple drug murder and naming Tamerlan Tsarnaev as involved in this murder as well, which, of course, would go a long way to demonizing Tamerlan Tsarnaev so that people stopped looking for all the inconsistencies in the Boston bombing. Well, now it's come out that this Ibrahim Todashev did not have a knife. He was unarmed. There were other law enforcement people there at the time who were saying, no, there wasn't. The new story is that the FBI agent, but one of the two FBI agents had left the room, so it was just this Ibrahim and one FBI agent. And supposedly they were trying to get him to sign this confession, and Ibrahim tried to leave, apparently tripped over a table, and the FBI agent shot him. It has now come out, not only was Ibrahim Todashev unarmed, he was shot 6 times, including a gunshot to the crown of his head. That's an execution shot. And looking at the photos, it looks to me like it was close to being a contact wound, because of the removal of hair around the wound and the puffing up of the skin tissue from gun propellant. This guy was executed. And what it looks like to me happened is the FBI was going to coerce this guy and threaten him and browbeat him to sign this confession so they could name Tamerlan as a suspect in this drug murder to further demonize him in the public eye. Ibrahim refused to sign the confession. He tried to leave. And all of a sudden the FBI realizes this guy's going to leave. He's going to get out on that pesky internet and say the FBI was trying to force him to sign a false confession. And at that point, he could not be allowed to leave that room alive, and that's why he was shot 6 times, including a gunshot right to the top of his head. The crown of the head. Not the temple, not the back, not the side, not the kind of gunshot that you would actually inflict on somebody if you're in a fight for your life. They executed this guy. And the FBI is promising a full and thorough review of this incident, which will take many months, of course. But a lot of Islamic groups, and frankly, every single American citizen ought to be standing up and saying, okay, guys, what the heck is going on? Because we know the FBI loves conveniently dead people. In fact, before it came out that this guy was unarmed, and before it came out he'd been shot 6 times, including the crown of the head, the FBI story is, oh yeah, he was on the verge of confessing. He was ready to sign that confession, and then all of a sudden he just went wacko and we had to kill him. That doesn't make any sense at all. Remember Bruce Ivins? Following 9/11, there were these anthrax letters that were sent to members of Congress and members of media, and the members of Congress were all terrorized by this anthrax into passing the USA Patriot Act without actually even reading what was in there. And they were sent in letters that were written to look like they'd come from semi-literate Arab Muslims saying, Allah, death to America, and the rest of it. Then it turned out the anthrax was a weaponized strain from the U.S. government's own biological warfare labs. And then they went out and said, well, who sent the anthrax letters? And they went after Dr. Stephen Hatfield. They made his life a living heck. Absolutely destroyed him. Then they went after Dr. Ayad Assam. And then they were going after Bruce Ivins. And then Bruce Ivins was suicided. And at that point, the FBI said, oh yeah, this was the guilty guy. He's dead and gone. We can't ask him questions, and he can't speak in his own defense. Yes, he is to blame. Case closed. No more questions. If you're a loyal American, you will believe the people we tell you are guilty, because if you don't, the terrorists will win. Meanwhile, of course, the actual security system at the lab, where that, sorry about that, I didn't have that turned off. There we are. The security system at that U.S. government biowarfare lab, where that strain of anthrax was being kept, did catch somebody breaking into that lab without the proper authorization, Dr. Philip Zak. But we don't need to investigate Dr. Philip Zak. And by the way, Dr. Philip Zak had been caught up in an altercation with this Dr. Ayam Assad, and it attempted to frame him for all kinds of things. A racist ranting called the Camel Club. And Dr. Philip Zak lost his job because of this racially motivated attacking of Dr. Assad. But no, the FBI can't be bothered investigating him. We've got Stephen Hatfield to look at, and we've got Dr. Assad to look at, and we've got the conveniently dead Bruce Ivins to blame it all on. And now we have this tragedy down in Florida, which looks just like an execution. Gunshot into the crown of the head at close range. And the FBI saying, he attacked us with a knife. He was on the verge of confessing, but he attacked us with a knife. Oh yeah, there wasn't really a knife. He was flinging himself at us. Well, no, maybe he was tripping over the table trying to leave. This thing is just getting worse and worse. Now, getting over to the Woolwich hoax terror attack. We now know there was no beheading. We know that photos and videos of the suspect were altered to make his hands look like they were covered in blood. They've now admitted there really wasn't a beheading at all. The victim died of multiple stab wounds. Now it's come out that the guy who carried out this attack had been tortured. Had been tortured at the request of British intelligence. Apparently, when he was living down in Kenya, this guy was subjected to systematic torture and abuse by Kenyan troops on behalf of Britain's security systems. They made this guy. Okay, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Alex in Texas. Aloha, Alex. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Alex, are you there?
Mike. Yes. Hi, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're on the air.
Okay, perfect. I just heard the previous caller speak about the IRS sending letters to people in the third stage of life, and that is effectively true. I actually have read 2 pieces of correspondence for someone that actually works with me, or for me, and she's, I think, 82, 83, and she got a piece of correspondence where she was like, Alex, can you tell me why I'm having to answer these questions since you know so much about, all the alternative information? And I'm like, well, this is the first time I've ever heard about this, but you call up the phone number and they keep you on hold. And then
you mean the IRS's phone number?
Yes.
Yeah.
You call up the IRS and they keep you on hold, and then finally someone comes by and says, if you have a third party, like either doing a translation or because they can't hear well, then they won't talk to you. They'll tell you that you have to come in and see a representative with that person in order to get an explanation as to why why that information is necessary and being asked of you. But it pries very deeply. It asks you give any any money, any contributions? Have you been asked for political contributions? And do you make political contributions in other countries and other areas of political interest?
Well, the only way that would be a legitimate question is if you are donating to tax-free charitable organizations and you're itemizing your deductions. But you would automatically put down the organization being donated to in your itemized list. And so this is really not making a lot of sense.
No, it's not, Mike. But before things happen, a lot of things are thrown in to confuse things. And the thing is, people need to realize that they're confusing the language, and they're confused. They're muddying the waters, like you say. So that there's no clear explanation, and when everything hits the fan like it's going to, there's no real direction anyone can go into, and later on people won't know who to trust.
We got to take a break for commercials, Alex. I mean, I need to see one of these letters to know that it is from the IRS and is not the American Community Survey from the Census Department, which would make a lot more sense. We've got to take a break for commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a quick program note, I'm going to be taking over the microphone for John Stadmiller for his show following my own. So if you want to stick around and call in, I'm going to be reporting a lot of the same stories. But I got a few more bits and stuff left over that we'll get into during that 2 hours there. Also a reminder, of course, that Republic Broadcasting is still having their fundraising drive. John has this 1,000-ounce of silver drive, but you don't have to donate silver. You can donate cash, checks, box tops, coupons, whatever. Every little bit helps. And if everybody listening to this broadcast would send in just $5, RBN would be funded. Go out, get more on-air affiliates, go back on shortwave. Just all of this stuff to reach the audience. Because of Quintgate, Americans who have been willfully blind and bamboozled up to now are starting to ask really important questions. And right now it's very important for Republic Broadcasting to be able to reach those Americans and give them the answers they need to have to make their good choices. So you can go to republicbroadcasting.org. There's a donate button there. If you go under contacts, you can get the postal address. You can call up the phone number there and pledge your donation. And every little bit will help. Every little bit is needed. There is no such thing as too small a donation. We don't get huge corporate funding. We don't have big advertisers that support us for our political views. We don't get checks with lots of zeros in them from shadowy non-governmental organizations. We're out here for the people, and we do need the help of the people to keep going. Right now, the warmongers, they're spending millions of dollars to sell you more war. And you got to ask yourself, how much are you willing to spend to call it off? That's all we're saying here. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the economy right now. We're seeing this article over at Investment Watch blog that the fiscal pact is dead and the end of the European Union has begun. And what the article is basically talking about is that everything the European Union has done to save the European Union from collapse has failed utterly. And we know why. They won't actually acknowledge what the real problem is. The private central bank issuing all the public currency as a loan at interest, which by design produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt. But none of the politicians will look at that. They won't acknowledge it, and that means everything they are doing is doomed to fail. It's just a media opportunity. And I've often described Europe as this large boat sitting in the water, and there are 17 holes in the bottom of the boat, but there are only 16 corks. And everything that the European politicians are doing amounts to grabbing a cork out from one hole, pounding it into the other in full view of the press camera, saying, I'm working on the problem. But the water still comes in, and Europe is still sinking. So, yeah, it's failing. And they can't stop it until they're willing to get rid of that private bank. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show. And the corporate media is taking a break from Quintgate. They're going on about this photograph taken by the Mars Curiosity rover, which has a rat-shaped rock. And everybody said, they found a rat on Mars. And I sympathize for those Curiosity people. We went through all of that with Viking. Remember the face on Mars? It was just, people were going wacko about that. And it's amazing. During the coast phase of the mission, where the Vikings were on their way to Mars, the time was filled with all kinds of practicing and rehearsal. There was actually a third lander kept in what was called the sandbox at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And one day somebody seeded the sandbox with a fossil trilobite that was uncovered during the exercise of the soil mechanics surface sampler. And training exercise, they said, yes, we found this and blah, blah, blah. And NASA ordered all images of that fossil destroyed because they knew if just one of them got out, it was going to be crazy. So I feel bad for those Curiosity flight technicians. We know there's no large fauna on Mars. And we know that because there is nothing for large fauna to live on. The life on Mars is basically at the bacterial stage. And before you can have a rat, you must have the things rats will eat. And before you can have those, you must have the things that they will eat, all the way down the food chain. So this is actually cheapening the image of the whole mission, I think, for them to make a big deal about it. Now, getting back to the economy, the Telegraph over in Great Britain is basically saying there is no savior in sight as world credit cycle rolls over. And they're basically saying any nation that has not already achieved a self-sustaining recovery is going to fail. And so we're seeing all these financial writers, they're hemming and hawing around the real issue, which is the foundation of the banking system itself creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. But they're still not quite willing to point the finger and say, this is the problem. They're getting close. They're starting to acknowledge that, yeah, all these problems track back to this machine that creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. Private central banking. By the way, a little note. Somebody made a video out of the radio show that I did a while back on All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. It's about 45 minutes long. And I reprised it to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com today to go along with all this renewed screaming about Syria and Iran and all the rest of that. And that video has already cranked up something like 250,000 views, which I think indicates that people really find a resonance with this explanation for all of these wars and assassinations we've had in our history here. Now, getting on to the subject of gold and silver. Apparently over in Singapore, they're dealing with what they call a supply constraint, which basically means everybody wants to buy physical, nobody wants to sell. And so they're charging record premiums. If you want to buy gold at the spot price, you can buy those paper contracts. If you want the physical, it's spot plus a huge premium. The demand for physical gold and silver is extraordinary. We're hearing this from James Turk over at Investment Watch blog, who is also saying there are going to be more bail-ins. The only way they can keep this Ponzi scheme banking system propped up is to just directly loot their own customers to balance the books. Going to take another break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're getting our daily dose of gratuitous China bashing. They're out there saying Chinese hackers have stolen the blueprints to the F-35. I'm sorry, China's not that stupid. The F-35 is a very expensive piece of junk. Can't fly in the fog, can't fly in the rain, can't get too close to lightning storms or the electronics all quit working. The helmet fire control system still won't work. The naval version can't land on a carrier. I'm sure the U.S. government would love it if China were building the F-35. That would cripple their economy and leave them with an ineffective dogfighter. Even the Pentagon says the F-35 is not up to the equal of the current Russian fighter planes. It's just more China bashing, because sooner or later, the U.S. government's going to be going after China and that gosh darn gold yuan. Now, getting back to gold itself here, there's an interesting video by Mike Maloney and Chris Martinson called Why Did Silver and Gold Collapse? We have it linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. Now, this is actually from last April. But even back then, they're talking about there's something funny going on with the gold and silver market. And what they did is they went back and looked at the actual numbers of gold futures contracts that were delivered on. And what they came up with is that between the amount of gold that was being purchased or mined and the amount of gold that was delivered on the gold futures contracts, there was a discrepancy of 4,500 tons of gold. And they're asking the question, where did this come from? And the answer inevitably is, it is gold that is being let go from the U.S. gold reserves and that is being leased or loaned by the private central bank gold depositories to keep those little commodities contracts going, to not collapse the commodities market. And even with all of that extra gold, we still have these gold contracts are failing to deliver. And they're being settled on their cash value plus a premium to hold off the lawsuits. And that is why I am telling you the situation is getting desperate, because now countries like Germany are demanding their gold bullion back that is on deposit in the New York Federal Reserve. And remember when this whole issue of gold repatriation started up, and we had that opinion piece written by the editor of CNBC, who came out and said it doesn't really matter if the gold is actually there or not, we have it on the bookkeeping. And Germany ought to be happy with that. And Germany's private central bank, that is more loyal to other private central banks than to Germany itself, said, oh yeah, we believe it, that's fine, you don't need to see your gold. So obviously we are seeing this gigantic fraud taking place, trying to keep the price of gold and silver down through paper contracts, through fraud. They are borrowing or leasing other people's gold to keep these contracts moving forward. They've got a huge gold and silver ETF bubble they've built up that's about ready to explode. And this is probably also the reason why so many of these gold bars floating around now have tungsten cores. And remember, in Germany, I think one of the reasons Germany wanted their gold back where they can inspect it is because it was in Germany that some of these gold bars, bearing the hallmarks of Fort Knox and the Federal Reserve, were found to have these tungsten cores. So it's a very good video, and they're talking about, paper versus physical. And again, if you want to invest in silver and gold, I highly, highly recommend it as a wealth preservation strategy. Buy physical. Do not invest in those paper contracts. They've got to collapse eventually. And of course, you can go to Republic Trading Group. They've got a banner ad at my website, banner ad at Republic Broadcasting. And when you do business with Republic Trading Group, part of that money is also going to help support Republic Broadcasting. Now, over at blacklistednews.com, there's an article talking about the issue of rehypothecation. This used to be a dirty word, where central bankers never spoke of it out in public. It was always talked about in a deep hush. And now they're basically talking about it openly. Yeah, this is just the way we do business. You deposit your gold in my gold depository. We rehypothecate it to use it for other purposes. But we still have it on our inventory as in-house belonging to you. This is a double listing of assets, which would be a criminal fraud, felony fraud for private citizens and businesses to do. But the federal government and the Federal Reserve, the private central bank that sees itself as above the law, remember, we've got Alan Greenspan on video saying the Federal Reserve answers to no federal government authority. They're cheating. They're counting the same gold multiple times in multiple contexts. And now they're openly starting to act like, well, this is just the way we do business, and you shouldn't complain about this. It'll all work out in the end, really. I'll tell you how it's going to work out. If Obama succeeds in confiscating all the guns in America, they're going to come back and confiscate all your silver and gold. Just like Roosevelt did with gold back in 1933. And they'll give you a big stack of ink and paper to compensate you for it. That'll promptly implode in its value, just like happened in 1933. Now, over in the Los Angeles Times, they're reporting that initial jobless claims unexpectedly jumped to 354,000 last week. Have you ever noticed that when the jobless claims go in a good direction, it's hailed as a vindication of government policy, but when the jobless claims go the wrong way, it's always unexpectedly. It's always unexpected. We don't know why it's doing that. And also buried in the same article is the admission that previous jobless claims figures are constantly being revised upward. They'll have a low number that sounds really good in the news, and then the next week or week after that, it's revised back upward in the light of new data. They're just fudging it. It's all lies and illusions and deceptions here. Meanwhile, Moody's has downgraded Alcoa, the big U.S. aluminum provider, has been downgraded to junk status. Okay? And between the jobless claims and the downgrade of Alcoa, it doesn't make any sense for the American stock market to still be soaring the way it is, especially after what's going on in Asia. We're clearly seeing intervention in the stock markets to keep them propped up, to use as a political banner, to wave back and forth and say, see, the economy is wonderful. And of course, all of these Wall Street firms that have been buying huge blocks of stock to keep the stock market up, to keep investors in the market. Don't let them get the idea of going to silver or gold. Keep them in the stock market. Depress gold, artificially inflate the stock market, and now they're trapped. Because those huge blocks of stock they have been buying are now a substantial portion of their assets. And if there is a major downturn on the stock market now, if it's allowed to happen, many of these Wall Street firms are going to be instantly insolvent. And so now they're stuck. They have to keep rigging it. They can't change the policy. This is now permanent until the whole thing implodes. And the longer they use these cheating techniques to delay the inevitable, the worse the crash will be. They're all just grabbing as much as they can and shoving it in their pocket. They'll, when the big kaboom happens, they'll hop on their corporate jet and fly off to the Caymans or someplace else like that, and they do not care that they will leave behind an absolutely shattered American nation. It's not their problem. I'm here to keep the stockholders happy. I'm here to keep my bonuses flying. It's somebody else's problem. Remember, Adam Smith said, by being personally greedy, I'm improving society as a whole. Well, we can look around with our own eyes and see that that is clearly not working. And in any event, Nobel Prize-winning mathematician John Nash, I think that was his name, in his doctoral dissertation proved Adam Smith was completely wrong. Now, down in Texas, this will give you an insight into where the politicians are thinking. The Texas legislature passed a bill, House Bill 535. The Senate ratified it. It's called the Buy American Bill, and it basically says the state of Texas's government will show a preference to purchase Texas and American manufactured goods when they are of equivalent cost and quality to foreign-produced products. Seems like common sense to me, and a good way to keep the tax revenues inside Texas, inside America. Governor Rick Perry vetoed this with no explanation. And obviously Rick Perry is pandering to somebody's vested corporate interests to keep throwing money to overseas providers, to not reduce the trade imbalance. This comes under the heading of what the heck was this guy thinking to do this? By the way, a little factoid you may want to think about. The United States is the only industrialized developed nation, the only rich country that does not mandate paid vacation time for workers. Other nations like France, Great Britain, Germany, all employers are required to provide a period of paid vacation time to their employers every single year. And usually the amount of time that you get increases with your seniority. The longer you were with a company, it's to build loyalty to a company. The longer you're with a company, the more vacation you get every year. Paid for. You don't take a hit on your paycheck. The United States is the only developed rich country that doesn't do that. The philosophy here in the United States is work them until they drop. No vacation, raising the retirement age, pillaging your retirement pension fund. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Apparently David Stockman was being interviewed by CNBC's Rick Santelli and is saying the error of central banking has become universal. Well, it's almost universal. They still have a few nations to conquer. And Stockman is out there saying, were the market allowed to operate as intended, it would almost immediately show the error of the way of this private central banking model. But in order to keep private central banking going, you say, today the market is entirely rigged. And he's absolutely right. We see it in the manipulation of gold and silver prices. We're seeing it with the plunge protection team. We're seeing it with this high-frequency computer trading. It's all a carefully crafted illusion to keep you a slave to those private central bankers. They will not let go of the world. They have started wars, assassinated presidents to keep their iron grip on the people of the world. And yes, it could all come down, and because of globalization, it could all come crashing down at the same time. And it will be a once-in-several-lifetimes opportunity to free the people of planet Earth from this scam, this rule by contrived debt, which is no more legitimate than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. Having private bankers in charge of your nation's economy makes no more sense than having drug addicts in charge of your pharmacies. After a while, everything becomes a placebo. Now, over at From the Trenches World Report, they're running this article, dollar could be in danger as the world's currency. Yes, it is. Other nations are turning away from the dollar. China and Australia are doing direct currency exchanges without going through the dollar. China and New Zealand getting ready to do that. China and Venezuela are trading back and forth without going through the dollar. It is the reimposition of the dollar as the global currency which is the primary U.S. agenda for all these wars of conquest. That's what it's all about. They're asking you to send your children to be killed and crippled over a piece of ink and paper. That is how inhuman these banker types really are. Now, Chicago is getting ready to close 50 public schools, mostly in the black and Latino neighborhoods, but apparently felt comfortable spending $100 million in taxpayer funds to build a stadium for a private college. There's fascism on display there for you. Talking about Obamacare, what a complete disaster it is. Apparently, the paperwork burden and abuses of the insurance companies have reached the point where doctors are starting to drop out of the system by simply saying they won't accept any insurance at all. They're going to operate their offices as a cash and cure business, and they're basically putting up their prices. They're lowering their prices because they don't have to incur all the costs of dealing with Medicare and Obamacare and all these other issues. They find that their overhead shrinks dramatically. And so they're posting their prices and saying, if you want to come in to have this taken care of, this is what we're going to charge you. And they're starting to operate outside the system. And whereas the law requires you to have health insurance, Obamacare did not include a provision telling the doctors they had to go along with this system. And as a result, many of them are. There is something going on with our police force that we need to be asking about. There's been another tragic shooting. Okay, and this this was reported on NBC. Apparently, there was a woman at Costco who had a knife in her hands who was shot by the police because supposedly their taser wasn't working. So they just shot her. This woman was employed handing out samples of pizza at the Costco. Gee, I think we understand why she was holding a knife. Now, the police are trying to claim that she went crazy and was saying bizarre things and attacked them with the pizza knife, and they had to shoot her. That doesn't seem to be what's coming out of the eyewitnesses. She was there with a knife and just handing out slices of pizza, and the cops reacted. And we get back to this situation. Are the police on these SSRIs? Because if they are, and they are armed, they are a danger to the public safety. And we have a right and a need to know. Now, speaking of guns and whatever, as I mentioned earlier in the week, Adam Kokesh has now canceled his plans for an armed march into Washington, D.C. He is still making the rounds of various talk shows. He is not welcome here. Now calling for what he calls an open source march on the state capitals to demand the orderly dissolution of the federal government. Well, as long as he's not calling for people to carry guns yet, I'm okay with this, although it's not likely to be effective. I mean, we had all these American colonials who were marching around demanding the orderly dissolution of the British government, and the British government didn't listen. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. When we come back, we've got phone calls on the line. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Well, first of all, I could start off with Adam Kokesh. I listen to a lot of alternative media, and I was really happy to see how universally his march on Washington with guns armed was rejected by the community as a whole.
Yes.
That really was reinforcing to me. But second of all, I wanted to go back to what you're talking about, the central banking system and the economy. And something that people need to remember is a collapse is inevitable. It's planned.
Yes.
And from their side,
hang on. I need to interrupt there. It's not planned. Yes, it was inevitable, and they knew it was inevitable when they set this up 100 years ago, but they all went to their graves wealthy and happy and figured it's going to be somebody else's problem to deal with. Nobody's planning to collapse the economy. The problem is they can't stop it. You know, they're down to the point where they're literally stealing from their own bank customers to keep the system going. And they're not intentionally planning it because it's going to wreck their lives as well. They just can't stop it.
From what I understand, it is planned to collapse central banks through individual countries and then unite them under some sort of global central bank. That's my understanding, is that there's a plan out there that, all these central banks, America, Germany, Euro, all these banks, when the collapse happens, the solution is going to be, what we need to have is a global central bank where it is no longer, one country dominating.
There's already one there. It's in Switzerland. It's the Bank of International Settlements. It's the private central bank's private central bank. But I think the people of the world are going to understand that globalism and private central banking are what destroyed the planet. So more globalism and private central banking isn't going to fix it. It'd be like backing up the Titanic and whacking that iceberg on the other side to see if that stops the water from pouring in.
Oh, and you and I both completely understand that, but I think that the people out there who, when there's no food and they can't pay their houses and their electricity's being turned off and, it's Mad Max zone, when they put forth a solution of, hey, listen, we can get this thing going again, the solution is to have a central bank with a completely digital currency where your chip, your barcode, your card, your ISA system, what have you, I think there'll be a lot of people.
I'm sure they're thinking of that, but I think given right now that the vast majority of world's people have come to distrust bankers as a class and government as a class, I think anybody who shows up following the collapse of the current system and says, let's start that same system all over again, it ought to be tarred, feathered, hanged, drawn, quartered, burned, and the ashes peed on by a rabid dog.
And that's where the cataclysm, and this is just my understanding of how it works.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be some sort of, World War, nuclear attack, what have you. And the response to it is going to be, like you said, a war and then a collapsed economy, and it's going to be, listen, all these world wars, all these fighting, all these resources, what we need to do is have these under one central umbrella where it is all evenly distributed to the world's people, yada, yada, yada. Just trust us. I think that is their plan. I think that's
well, I'm sure they're going to put forward that plan, but we didn't see it work in the Soviet Union. We certainly haven't seen globalism working here in the Western banking nations. If they want to sell us a new system, they have to demonstrate it's going to work for the people of planet Earth and not just more of the same thing that works for themselves. And so I think they're going to run up against a huge amount of hostility. And again, I don't think they're intentionally crashing the world's financial system. I think they recognized that this whole private central banking model did have a finite lifespan. We know that Keynes basically dodged the question about its eventual collapse, saying, we're all going to die sometime here. It's not going to be our problem to deal with. And they're coming up with this plan in the hope to take advantage of the crisis. But I don't think they intentionally want the system to crash. Or they could have let it crash long before now without going in and looting their own depositors' accounts. I think they're just trying to cling on with their fingernails and keep it going a little bit longer here. And yes, there are people who are going to say, all right, let's accept it's going to come down, it's going to crash. How do we take advantage of it? How do we run in there? And that's why I keep talking about the blueprint for the new America, for everybody on planet Earth to already be thinking and deciding what kind of a new government they want in their region, their nation, their county, their state, their town, so that we don't have all these carpetbaggers running in and saying, I got a whole new system for you to set up. Just sign your name on the dotted line and we'll get you all back up and running again in the same scam all over. And that's why I keep, So it's not intentional, it is unavoidable.
Well, I heard an interesting theory one time, and that theory was that the people who are really high up, and then for lack of, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the people who really have been pushing for a global government for hundreds of years, I've heard a theory that they actually disdain the Wall Street bankers and the Bernankes and the Greenspans who would just willfully plunder their fellow man to make themselves richer, and they actually
because after all that's their job. It's our job. The top of the banking, we're supposed to be looting the planet, not you underlings. They want it all for themselves.
I completely agree. And the solution, like you've always said, is is not bigger government. The solution is smaller, localer governments where individual problems, because to be quite frankly, any problem that you're having over there in Hawaii, me on the East Coast, that really doesn't, your local government doesn't really have an effect on me. But that's where people should be focusing. They shouldn't be focusing on presidents and federal governments. They should be focusing on their local governments and their sheriffs and their local mayors, and because that is what truly has the effect on them day to day. Same thing with banking. You shouldn't be in, RBS or Chase Manhattan. You should be in a local credit union, if in a bank at all.
Yes.
Because at least you might have some sort of say or value or input in how that is run on a day-to-day basis.
Well, we're basically seeing a repeat of a phenomenon we've seen throughout history, which is that people of wealth and power have an instinct for empire building. What they've got is never enough. I need more. I may be the king of England, but I'm going to conquer France. I may have, $9 billion, but I'm going to set up a Ponzi scheme so I can get $65 billion. It's addictive behavior. Money is addictive, power is addictive. We need to recognize that. The Founding Fathers recognized that. That's why they set up the United States the way they did. Again, I'm absolutely opposed to one world government or globalism. I think the planet Earth would be a lot better off with 1,000 little tiny nations each taking care of themselves and united only when some nutcase grabs a nation and uses it to declare war on their neighbors. But this idea of a one world government, it's going to end all social evolution because all governments just keep the status quo going. Look at here in the United States of America. The entire economy is about keeping people working just to stay where they are. No progress being made. Our space program is just all but evaporated. There's hardly any new R&D. It's all about getting you to work as hard as you can to keep buying new razor blades, to keep buying new computers which fail every 5 years, to keep buying new light bulbs. It's all this planned obsolescence thing. And the biggest reason to avoid a global government is because what happens when inevitably some total psychopath seizes power of that government? Because sooner or later, you're going to get bad rulers in every government, whether it's a Stalin in Russia, a Pol Pot in Cambodia, Hitler in Germany, and if it's just a one-world government, there is nobody out there to stand up and stop their policies when they say, this place is really kind of crowded. Let's just wipe out that entire species of human beings and make a lot more room for us.
I completely agree. And going back to what you said about a stagnating culture, that is absolutely true. If you talk about a space program, it's not important that the goal wasn't to put a man on the moon. That wasn't the benefit, to say, wow, look at what we did. The technology that we had to develop to put somebody on the moon, that led to things like Velcro and, heat-resistant panels. That is the progression. Any technology that we are being exposed to today is just to further monitor us or to further surveil us. That's where we're going. We're not being pushed to our limits as a civilization. We are being pushed to how can we better imprison and monitor and keep track on individuals.
Well,
don't get out of line.
You're absolutely right about the space program. Obviously, putting a man on the moon was the political agenda. But what it was, NASA in those days was a civilian technology incubator where these new processes and new materials were being developed and made available to the civilian population, as opposed to military development where whatever they come up with is classified and held off the civilian market for 10 to 20 years. And therefore, by the time it's finally released on the civilian market, its commercial applications are usually not all that good. And the reason I'm a big supporter of reviving America's manned space program is as a technology incubator to stimulate new industries, new products, and new manufacturing in the United States of America. But our government just doesn't think that's important, and so we're kind of out of that business right now. But again, to recap, and I got to let you go because we got another caller who's been waiting very, very patiently. The coming economic crash was not planned. It is simply unavoidable. Okay, apparently the second caller just dropped, so we can keep on talking. It's unavoidable. And the people who set up these private central banks know they don't last forever. They make the bankers insanely rich, then the system collapses, and they simply go on over to some other country and start the same scam all over again.
Well, see, and I would disagree in the fact that the people like, Jekyll Island, Rothschilds and these people who set up the central bank, they knew from the beginning that printing fiat currency and making debt would allow them to covertly attain real wealth in the form of real estate.
And political control, And we're seeing it here in the United States already. We were talking the other day about up in Detroit, where the Detroit Institute of Art Museum is now having to sell their art collection for fire sale prices to try and avoid closing. And this is always the last stage in this private central bank scam. When everybody is hungry and in debt, they go out with more of this ink and paper stuff, and they buy the real, tangible assets of the nation for pennies on the dollar.
Well, it's John Perkins. It's Confessions of an Economic Hitman. It is, how do you convert fiat, junk, garbage paper into real, for these people who see long term, who see, 100 years out, where will we be? I think that this collapse, and we are in the end game. In the next 15, 20 years, there's a very high significant chance that there is going to be some sort of global governing body.
Not if I can help it.
But that's the plan. Within the next 20 years to have some,
Oh, I know that's always the plan. I know that's always the plan. The mental homes are full of people who are in there saying, I'm going to be king of the world someday. Everybody's always planning to do it. Whether they can do it or not, of course, is another matter entirely. A lot of these people at those top levels, they're fiercely independent. They don't want to be ruled by somebody else. They all see themselves as the ruler. But I am adamantly opposed to global government or a one-world society. I believe in political and cultural diversity. And, what we need is regionalism. We got to turn our back on globalism. Globalism is not working except for those people at the top of the global structure. We need regionalism. 1,000 little tiny countries all over planet Earth, each taking care of their own, each having their own agriculture, their own manufacturing, their own infrastructure, taking care of themselves, not dependent on some goods manufactured on the other side of the planet and transported in through the banking cartel at huge markup. That's really what's best for humankind and planet Earth, I think.
And I completely agree with you. My argument is that everything that has taken place to what is currently taking place is leading towards what will take place, in the sense that you look at our technology, it's all set up for monitoring. You look at our resources, they've all been taken over by privately owned companies. You look at our government, it is now federal power. 50 years ago, if a federal cop or an FBI agent came in and a local sheriff would see him, he'd say, get the hell out of here. We don't want to have anything to do with you. But today, everything is federal. Our resources are taken. We're monitored 100% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this has all been planned. I don't think this is a mistake. And I think that the collapse that is going to happen, that is 100% inevitable, is on the books and has been on the books for at least 100 years.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end of the segment here, and I guess we're going to have to disagree on that particular point here. We both understand a crash is coming. You think it was part of some gigantic master plan. I think it is simply recognized as unavoidable at this point. And again, the people who set up private central banking knew it could not last forever, that at the point where all the real wealth of a nation was safe and secure in their pocket, it would all come crashing down. But they're okay with that, because the real wealth of the nation is now in their pockets.
Yeah, and that's planned. That's all part of the plan. They wanted that to happen. They wanted to figure out a way to take publicly owned property and assets, transfer it to private hands, and leave the public holding nothing but worthless paper.
I will agree that was part of the plan, or at least an epiphenomenon of the plan. But the idea that they want a crash to happen, no. If they were going to do that, there were plenty of opportunities long before now. They wouldn't be looting their own savers' accounts to keep the scheme going. They wouldn't be engaging in all this fraud about gold and silver, trying to hang on. because they understand when it all comes crashing down, if they don't have a world war to hide behind, if they don't have an armed revolution in the United States to blame it on, the American people, in fact the people of planet Earth, are all going to be pointing the finger of blame right where it squarely belongs, private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Kyle. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And speaking of your retirement savings, as that last commercial was talking about here, something you need to be aware of, and that is how much interest you're getting on your regular savings account from one of these too-big-to-fail banks. Okay, if you go over, there's a website called moneyrates.com that will actually list out the actual interest you're getting on your savings account, and it turns out it's really very tiny right now. In general, you will get 0.01%, 1/100% interest on your savings deposits. Some banks are actually now charging savers to hold their money. So you're actually losing real money. And of course, you're always losing real purchasing power to inflation here. So if you have $1,000 in your savings account, you're basically going to get 10 cents in interest per year. Whereas if you take that $1,000 and you put it into physical silver or gold, you're definitely going to get a lot better. Because the reality is that whatever interest the banks are paying on their savings account is nowhere near the rate of inflation. So if you're keeping your money in a bank savings account, you are losing purchasing power. You are losing real wealth and value in that bank account. So you got to look for an alternative. And they don't want you to go to the alternative. They want gold and prices way down to scare you back into the stock market, keep your money in the bank savings account. Meanwhile, of course, people like George Soros and the New York Federal Reserve, they're buying as much gold as they can get their hands on to replace what they've been playing all these little funny games with. Now then, the George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin case is back in the news. Apparently, they're coming up 12 days. The trial is going to start over whether George Zimmerman is guilty of second-degree murder. It's a very contentious issue with regard to stand your ground. It looks like Zimmerman was basically out there looking for trouble and just decided Trayvon Martin was going to be it. And I don't want to get into the pros and cons of that story here, so put that phone down right now. But George Zimmerman's legal defense fund is out there asking the public for money. We need more money. And apparently they have already raised something like $354,000 for donations to protect George Zimmerman, to mount a defense. Whatever happened to the public defender's office? If Zimmerman has committed this crime and he can't afford a lawyer, the taxpayers will provide him one. But they're out there saying, no, you've got to give us money. We've just gone through all this $354. What did they spend it on? He hasn't even gone to trial yet. Where did all the money go? Remember the legal defense fund that Adam Kokesh started following that obviously staged arrest? And then the government simply dropped all the charges, and Kokesh gets to keep that money. It's all a scam. We're going to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're seeing this piece of news that's coming out from the Israeli media that Hezbollah, now that Hezbollah has crossed from Lebanon into Syria to aid Assad against the hired mercenaries, the demonization is on, and the Israeli media is now claiming that Hezbollah is planning attacks against the West. So get ready for a false flag attack, because Israel always telegraphs these things, they don't know when to quit. They have no shame whatsoever about what's going on there. Alrighty, now, we got a caller on the line here. We're going to go to the Heretic in Colorado. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Hello, are you there?
One second, I'm having a problem here.
All right, we're having a little... Okay, you there now?
Hello.
Hello, finally got you.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, that was an interesting conversation. Just to play devil's advocate, I think you guys are both right.
Okay.
In your own way. And, maybe as a happy medium, since they know it's inevitable, how are they going to they're positioning themselves to capitalize on it.
Now, that is exactly what I was trying to say.
Okay. I can go with that. I really do wonder about. I didn't want to call about Adam Kokesh, but I wanted to say that I really appreciate. I listen to you when I get a chance. I really appreciate your inconvenient backbone, and we all need to get that and stand up to these people. And yes, they are insane, and they do belong in a loony bin. And no, this is not the new normal, and we will not accept their BS anymore. But I had a visual. This is kind of old news, but about the gold smackdown.
Yes.
About over a month ago, and have you ever, like when you're flying a kite, and then you just kind of let go of the reel and let the string just take the kite? I mean, what's going to happen to the kite? It's gonna fall.
Yes.
And let the wind take it, and it's going to fall. But once you grab back onto it, and once the wind catches up, and the string becomes tight, that kite's going to fly a lot higher. And that's kind of how I see with the precious metals manipulation.
It's kind of a loose analogy, and we know the actual mechanism by which this is being done. The London Gold and Silver Fix ties together the prices of those gold futures contracts with the physical. And by simply over-issuing those gold futures contracts, those ETFs, they're creating a bubble that drives down the value of the physical, and yet we know that physical is in short supply. We know that people are actually trading physical at elevated premiums. They really should be treated as two different commodities. But this works to the advantage of the money junkies to be able to simply issue new paper to drag the physical down. And in a way, they're almost playing with physical silver and gold the way they did with the U.S. currency back in 1964, get everybody thinking that the paper is the money, the paper is the gold and silver, even though it really isn't. But as it was pointed out on that video we were talking about, to keep these overabundant gold contracts satisfied, somehow an additional 4,500 tons of gold entered the market, and the only rational source for all of that gold to satisfy those gold futures contracts is the U.S. government and the New York Federal Reserve, which is why they're all hemming and hawing when countries like Germany are asking for their gold bullion back.
Yeah, who else could possibly do that? But I share that all wars are bankers' wars. I try to sharing that with people, and the people who are capable of waking up are going to be receptive, and some people are just a waste of time. But you got to try.
Well, you shouldn't waste time on the ones who are a waste of time. They're too locked into their belief system. A lot of them are government agents or work for the government. They don't want to see it, but they're a dwindling minority. We'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Apparently, there's another tornado warning over Oklahoma. They were showing some aerial photos. Definite mesocyclone formation there. And so if you're in Oklahoma or that part, be safe. Stay away from the windows. Have your emergency supplies ready to go. And no, it's not the fault of global warming. Don't let them bamboozle you about that. Somebody just sent me in an article that apparently the top state lawmaker in Michigan is introducing a bill that would protect the art collection at the Detroit Institute of Art from being sold off when Detroit declares bankruptcy. So they're moving to try and protect that. And it illustrates an important point that has been much neglected by the government. And this also gets back to the confiscation of America's public lands to be pledged as collateral on government borrowing, beginning under the Richard Nixon administration through the EPA as a dodge. You need to understand that there is and should be a big black line between property that is owned by the federal government itself and assets and property that is collectively owned by the American people. Now, when the government goes out and it rents or builds a building or it buys a military base or something, that's federal government property. But the public lands of the United States of America, the collections in the museums, that are taxpayer funded, that's the collective property of the American people. And the government doesn't really have a right to just arbitrarily come in, take your property, and use it for their own purposes. I would argue that the use of America's lands, the public lands, as collateral for government borrowing was illegal. And so when the U.S. government does collapse and those foreign creditors come on in and say, look, we've got this collateralization note to Yosemite or Yellowstone, we, the American people, ought to say, we didn't agree to that. You show us a contract signed by the American people pledging the American people's collective heritage as collateral on government borrowing. And if you didn't do the due diligence, that's your problem. So I'm glad that the Michigan legislature is moving to protect that. Because there does need to be a line drawn between what does belong to the federal government and what belongs to the people. And the government is not allowed to simply take the property of the people and just sell it or lease it or give it away. I would argue that this also applies to this privatization that has been sweeping the country, where taxpayer-funded property like highways and bridges that are the property of the people themselves, the government will simply turn around and sell it off to a private corporation who will then charge you rent to use what you as a taxpayer paid to build in the first place. And of course, all the problems with our nation began when the public currency was privatized by the Federal Reserve. Here we are 100 years later, and look at the devastation it has brought to the nation and its people. Now, there's a little scam going on right now. These things are fashion. They come in and they go out, and this one seems to be enjoying a revival, so you need to be aware of it. This was an article that was being reported in Boston on CBS, and apparently parents in the South Shore area are being targeted by this scam, where the scammers will call up and say, we have kidnapped your child. You will go to Western Union and wire so many thousands of dollars to this foreign foreign bank account, and then we will release your child. And it turns out the child hasn't been kidnapped at all. But it's a scam. And again, our government is too busy taking care of Israel to go after the scammers. And so it's open season on the American people, whether they're the little scammers there in South Shore, Boston, or the big scammers up in Wall Street. It's all open season on the American wallet, and there is no bag limit. Yeehaw, yeehaw, yeehaw. Apparently, down in Fort Worth, a police officer shot a homeowner 6 times, who apparently was just looking outside his home to find out why a burglar alarm went off. Turned out the burglar alarm had been triggered by accident. Cop just gunned him down. Apparently, Miami-Dade police grabbed a 14-year-old, put him in a chokehold, and charged this kid with a felony for glaring at the police with a dehumanizing stare. That's it. Kid gave the cops a dirty look, and they chokehold him and charge him with a felony. Meanwhile, up in Oregon, the police, responding to a reported attempted break-in, confiscated a veteran's rifle and charged him for firing a warning shot at this wanted felon who was trying to break into his home. Didn't Joe Biden just tell us when somebody's trying to break into your home, just fire a shot through the door and warn him off? And so here we have the police coming out and saying that even if you have a gun in your home, you're not allowed to fire a warning shot. You know, just take the advice of that 911 operator. That woman called that her ex-boyfriend was trying to break in. And the 911 operator said, we don't have any police to respond. Just ask him to leave. Ask him politely. Wag your finger at him or something. And, of course, the woman wound up getting assaulted, partly strangled, and raped. And now we have the police going on, and the police do nothing about the crime. And they go out and they charge this veteran for firing a warning shot as his house is being broken into. What kind of a message does that send to the American people? What kind of message does it send to the criminals? Same message Wall Street gets. It's open season on the American wallet, and there's no bag limit. We're going to grab a phone call here. Ken in Massachusetts. Aloha, Ken. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, you mentioned this about the government closing down this money laundering going on in Honduras and seizing $6 billion. I mean, what law gives them the right? I'm not in favor of these drug dealers and people like that, but all that money might not have been drug dealer money. So it gives them the right to do anything they want, anything like that. I don't get it.
Because they got nuclear missiles. And you're absolutely right. We don't know what that money was being used for. We know very often that these money launderers are being used by government agencies to funnel funds to, for example, non-governmental organizations that are operating in foreign countries covertly to destabilize that government. Like USA just got kicked out of Russia because they caught them trying to basically cause trouble and destabilization. And they get their money through these money launderers to break the evidence trail back to the sponsoring government. And
then my brother, my brother told me that when he was in Kenya, he would get money from the exchange, not from the. There's different places you can get your money exchanged.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them might not be legal, but some gives you a better deal than other places.
Yeah, I know that does go on a lot here. And again, it's all about, people have to take their commerce through the approved banks, so the banks get a piece of the action. And these unapproved money exchangers, because they're not siphoning off this huge overhead for their corporate owners, do in fact offer a better exchange rate. But what we have right now is a banking system that wants to monitor every single transaction for taxing purposes and to make sure that you are not spending money on things that they don't think you should be spending your money on. I mean, that's the whole model of taxation to begin with. We're going to take all of your money and then we'll give you part of it back as long as you do what we tell you to do. That's your slave chain right there.
All right, thanks.
All right. Now, over in California, the state Senate has approved 8 new gun control bills, including an ammunition registry. Now, we know they're talking about bullets are now going to be marked with identifying marks by the gun that is firing. That's a new requirement here. And they want an ammunition registry as to who bought this ammunition. And it's just more overhead for the gun stores. It's more hassle for the legal gun owners. And it's not going to stop the criminals, because the criminals are going to be able to buy, steal, or they'll just steal guns that belong to other people. So even if it's got an ID mark on the bullet, it doesn't lead to the real criminal. Criminals always come up with this stuff. In the days of revolvers, both the gun frame and the cylinder would be stamped with a serial number that was registered. And it was an old common mafia trick where 2 guys with the same gun would swap the cylinders. And so they would basically come back with a ballistics match to a gun, but it had 2 different serial numbers, so they couldn't link it to any one person through the gun registry. There are always ways to shortcut these things. But legislators love to legislate. They don't care what it costs, and they'll just come up with, sometimes with some pretty ludicrous suggestions that really are not going to work. Especially if somebody is doing home loading or reloading of their own ammunition. We're going to go to the phones here. Actually, no, I'm not going to take this phone call after the commercial break because I don't want to have to cut him off here. Up in Seattle, another lawsuit regarding police brutality against that department here. And another story coming out of California. Apparently the California police are paying cell phone companies to read text messages being carried by them without any warrants. And apparently they're going out, they're justifying it by busting marijuana dealers, and apparently they're handing out tickets to kids for just tiny infractions in order to get their phone numbers on the records, so they know who is calling from this number back and forth. Total surveillance state. And you know something? It's all full of garbage data, and the databases are so huge they cannot effectively derive anything from them. It's just more wasted taxpayer money and a police state, and the criminals are running rampant despite it all. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I think we have another caller on the line. Art, are you there? Aloha, what's on your mind?
Mr. Rivero, how you doing there?
I'm doing just fine, thank you.
2 things here. First of all, this whole concept of bullets being marked as they're fired, I don't know how they plan on doing this, if there's going to be some kind of stamp that's going to be created by way of the ejector plate or maybe on the tip of the firing pin which wouldn't make any sense because all that's going to do is stamp the casing, not the bullet. But here's a problem I have with that. There's this thing called, and this is my first point, there's this thing called ballistics. Mm-hmm. A rifle is just that. It has a rifled barrel.
Yes.
Which means the bullet is already marked as it is traveling through the barrel. Why do we need another identifying mark other than just to waste taxpayers' dollars on another piece of junk legislation that isn't going to do a damn thing to curb crime?
No, it absolutely isn't. I mean, if we get to a point where it is impossible to use a legal gun without leaving an evidence trail, the criminals will simply get an illegal gun. It'll simply be something else the smugglers will bring across the border, or they'll just go over to Fast and Furious and get an untraceable gun. Remember, that whole Iran-Contra thing in Arkansas involved the manufacture of M16s with lower receivers that had no serial numbers on them to give to the Contras, so the linkage to the United States, the U.S. government had deniability in that. Anybody with a decent machine shop can manufacture those parts without the serial numbers. As far as the pin leaving a mark on the shell casing, criminals will just start using revolvers again, where they take the brass away with them. Or they pick up the brass when they're done doing what they're doing. In any event, any mark that is put on the bullet at the time of firing is likely to be erased by the trip down the barrel. So it's just all these cockamamie ideas that just don't really work. But it allows somebody's nephew to get hired into the new Department of Bullet Mark Interpretation.
Yeah, either that or you take the gun apart and you find out where that stamp is and you file it off. Problem solved. Next point. You know, this whole goofy crap about being arrested for firing a warning shot, you know, yes. Even though, of course, like you pointed out, Joe Biden said fire a warning shot. Well, you know, I used to live in Georgia, and the nearest town, you know, my little hometown was maybe about 350 people max, and the nearest town to us within our own county was about 15 miles away in a population just a hair over 10,000. And that was when I lived in Georgia. And now I live in another state where our population in the nearest town to us is maybe, well, it's less than 4,000 people. But I noticed up here we have the same policy that we had down there where I lived in Georgia, and that is we don't fire warning shots. When we fire, you try to, we don't have any crime here at all. We have zero freaking crime. The worst thing we might get is, you know, some guy in a white beater might slap his old lady around a little bit. Bad joke, I know. Mm-hmm. But we don't even really have any of that going on. We have almost no crime at all, except maybe a DUI every once in a while. I think is about the worst thing I've heard of since I've been here. Mm-hmm. In just about a year that I've been here, I think the worst thing I've ever heard of was a DUI. I mean, that's about it. But, you know, nobody would break into a house around here because they understand the concept that a warning shot generally involves a chunk of lead impacting your kneecap, your belly, your chest, or some other fragile part of your body.
You know, the economy is really tight. Bullets are expensive. We can't afford a warning shot. You know, we only allocate one bullet per home invader. And it may well be that the reason they charged this vet is they felt by firing a warning shot and that bullet may have gone someplace recklessly, that may be the justification for the arrest. And, of course, the lesson we should take from that is don't fire a warning shot. Wait till the intruder is in your home and just drop him right there. Don't waste your time shooting for kneecaps or elbows. Just aim dead center on the target. So even if you miss a little bit, you're going to hit something important.
There you go.
You know, and if you live with conjoined walls, if you're in an apartment or you are in a condo where you have your neighbors are on the other side of that wall, please, please, please load your gun with what are called frangible rounds that are designed to shatter into little tiny harmless particles when they hit the wallboard. If you're using hollow points or full metal jacket, those can go through anywhere, depending upon the caliber, they can go through half a dozen of those sheet wall boards and still have enough energy to harm somebody. And you don't want to do that. When you pull that trigger, you're responsible for where that bullet goes, even if it misses your intended target. So, got to be really careful about that.
And I am a firm believer in gun control, an accurate shot.
Yeah, using both hands.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to use two hands. So make that shot count. If you fire a warning shot, at least hit a kneecap. That's a warning that next time I'm going to hit your kneecaps.
Yeah, I think you can actually...
Nice a lot, man. We'll talk to you later.
All right. I think you can actually get in trouble with that. I mean, there have been a number of homeowners who have shot a prowler in their home, wounding them seriously, and then the prowler turns around and sues the homeowner and wins, which tells you how screwed up our court system is. We've got to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443, and we'll be right back. Okay, we're seeing a story coming in now. Apparently, gunfire is being exchanged with a Turkish patrol near the Turkey-Syria border. We don't know who on the Syria side is pulling the trigger. Could be Assad's forces. Could also be the Free Syria Army attempting to create a pretext for an outright invasion. Meanwhile, the father of that gentleman down in Florida, who was gunned down apparently in cold blood by the FBI, is out there publicly saying his son was executed. Remember, the final gunshot was a gunshot to the crown of the head, a kill shot. And the father of the boy is saying the FBI killed his son to shut him up, which is consistent with my theory about what happened on that. Speaking of the FBI, apparently a government informant has gone public. This is going to be on ABC News tonight on, I think it's Diane Sawyer's show, where this FBI agent was asking for and receiving all kinds of goodies from this informant related to this murder of this Florida rapper. And he was getting watches and basketball tickets and the use of expensive luxury cars and all kinds of stuff. And it's just a reminder, the reality of the FBI is not what Hollywood and TV shows show you. That's just more of the propaganda. Going all the way back to J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI has been absolutely manic about its public image, and they have repeatedly interfered with the production of movies and television shows to make sure the public gets the correct image of the FBI, even though the reality is obviously quite different. In fact, if you go back to the FBI Story, which was a movie starring Jimmy Stewart, Hoover was actually on the set every day of production telling the director how to make this movie. That's how manic they are about that whole thing. Hoover just had this complete obsession with Hollywood. And his idea was that Hollywood should be serving the government's agenda at all times, and got into a major confrontation with Charlie Chaplin, which started even before Hoover became head of the FBI. And Hoover was out there trying to lecture Charlie Chaplin to stop making movies that showed government officials as oafish buffoons. And Chaplin ignored him because Chaplin understood his audience enjoyed movies that made government officials look like, well, government officials. And later on, of course, Hoover was very instrumental in having Chaplin's citizenship revoked and having him kicked out of the country. In fact, when Chaplin came back to the Academy Awards to get his Lifetime Achievement Award, it took a special act of Congress to let him back in the country long enough to pick up his Oscar. Boy, those FBI types, they know how to carry a grudge. Now, this is a story that I think is going to give a lot of people reason to feel very, very good about the young people of America right now, because there was this big stink over this kid who went to his school wearing a T-shirt from the National Rifle Association that said, "Protect your rights." And for wearing this shirt, did not have a gun, just an NRA T-shirt, was suspended from school and arrested. He was arrested for wearing an NRA T-shirt. And apparently there was a video that showed the teacher yelling at Jared for refusing to turn his shirt inside out. And the other students are shouting his name in support. Well, apparently, this kid was allowed back into school because of the public backlash, and he came back to school wearing his NRA Protect Your Rights T-shirts. 100 other students wore the same shirt. So good for these students to standing up to these little petty tyrants with teaching credentials. Now, there's a little story coming out of Facebook, and I'm already getting all kinds of nasty emails about this. because we're seeing this whole women's rights issue and the rape hysteria being fanned up again. We saw this all in the 1990s, led to all kinds of guys being sent to jail, wrongfully convicted of rape. National Organization of Women was screaming, no, we don't need DNA tests. You should believe the women when they... And there were all these horrible hoaxes. Davis, California rape hoax. It was a huge, huge thing. Everybody wanted to be a victim. Somebody was actually selling T-shirts back then that said potential rape survivor. That's how desperate they were to get that little bit of attention, that little bit of victim status here. So now there's this story, and was reported over in the LA Times about how Facebook is going to crack down on hate speech on Facebook, specifically targeting posts that promote violence against women. Now, this is laudable until you consider two things. First of all, I do a lot of stuff on Facebook. I've actually never seen a post that promoted violence against women. But second of all, this is a distraction. The government is coming out there saying, let us all get our knickers in a twist about images that promote violence against women while we ignore the far larger problem of images that promote war and violence against the entire human race. There's a lot of Muslim bashing that's going on out there in Facebook. But, oh no, we're going to focus over here on violence against women. And I actually got criticized saying, this is a real problem. How dare you say we should be opposed to images of all violence instead of violence against women? Well, aren't women part of that problem? If you're opposed to all images of violence, women will be, by default, included in that. Oh, no, we've got to focus on this thing. Amazing stuff here. All righty, let's see. Getting back to this educational tyranny situation. Over in Illinois, there was this high school teacher was asked to hand out a survey to his students regarding what is called politely high-risk behavior. And it was a survey in which the students were being asked to admit if they were engaging in drug abuse or certain sexual behaviors. And before handing this out, this high school teacher informed his students of the Fifth Amendment in the Bill of Rights against self-incrimination. This teacher is now in trouble from the school administration. You don't tell the students they have a right not to answer these things. We need to know this information. Now, if the survey had been anonymous, maybe, but apparently the students were being asked to put their names on these surveys and say, yes, my name is John Smith, and I smoke marijuana, and I've tried crack and meth, and I'm having sex with the sheepdog, and all the rest of that other stuff. And this high school teacher was right. Because if these students are putting this down on this paper with their name, the police could come in and say, yeah, this counts as a confession. You knew that you were putting your name in this admission down there. And the teacher's in trouble for reminding students they have a right against self-incrimination here. Completely out of control. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Steve in Florida. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. I'm sure you're familiar with Larry King having his own show. He announced having his own show on RT. And I was wondering what you thought of that.
Well, you know, I have to question Russia Today's judgment in bringing him on. Maybe they just got him for his name value, because he does have name value. But if you go back and look at the early history of Larry King, it's very questionable. He apparently got arrested. He was supposedly collecting money on behalf of a group that wanted to investigate the John F. Kennedy assassination, and he basically took the money and took it someplace else, and he got arrested for that. He's got a mugshot out there on the internet that you can find. And we know that Larry King was very loyal about pushing certain agendas when he worked for the American corporate media. So I don't know. It's I'm not as comfortable about Russia Today as I was before they hired Larry King.
Right. Not Ben Swan or anybody. You know, it could have just as easily been Ben Swan.
Yeah, if Russia Today had hired Ben Swan, yes, absolutely. But for them to hire one of the chief top propagandists of the American corporate media, all of a sudden, I'm getting weird, leery vibrations about Russia Today.
That's exactly what I felt. Just one more thing, Mike. Just a small request. I was wondering if you could have Brian Dawson on.
Oh well, he comes on a pretty regular basis on this show. And he may even be listening right now, although it's very early in the morning over there in Japan. But yeah, anytime he wants to come on the show, he just calls up and we put him on the air.
Oh, great. Thanks a lot, Mike. That looks so fishy to me. Larry King on RT.
Yeah.
And his own show to boot.
Yeah, definitely question marks are going off and saying, what are the... Again, it may just be the name value. Russia Today's management may have thought, we need somebody who's known to the American public to build our American audience. I think they could have picked somebody a little bit more prudently. But hey, it's their network. They will stand or fall on their choices.
Right. Thanks a lot, Mikey. Keep it up.
All right, I'll do my best. Now, here we are. Reminder, it is May 30th. We are coming up on the 1st of June this weekend. It is snowing in Gansu, China, right now. They apparently got 38 centimeters of snow during the evening of May 28th. It's 2 days ago. We're seeing a story over in the Daily Mail reporting on the British Spring is the coldest for 50 years. Remember 10 years ago when we had the British press, I think it was The Guardian, proclaiming snow will be a thing of the past. And here we are with another record-setting winter. The Met Office is saying, yeah, it's going to be the coldest spring in the last 50 years. Just amazing stuff out there. The Arctic ice extent has reached a 12-year high. Over in Alaska, they're having a problem from a 30-mile-long ice jam that has blocked up a river and triggered flooding of an Alaska town. The residents are having to flee. All these prognostications about snow-free winters and ice-free Greenland, none of it happened. It was a complete hoax to trick you out of carbon taxes, trick you into obedience to a global environmental authority. We must save planet Earth from all you icky-poo human beings. And none of their warnings happened. They were lying to you. And now, of course, all these various agencies and educational institutions and various scientists who traded their honor and integrity for global warming funding, now they're trying to backpedal and figure some way they can get out of this mess with their reputation intact. Not going to happen. We're going to go back to the phones here. Damien in South Carolina. Aloha, Damien. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Two things. One, the caller who just called in before about Larry King on RT, I think it's pretty obvious, and I think you hit the nail on the head with your last comment about it. I mean, RT often has people on there like Max Kaiser and other reporters and talk show people that discuss the issues that I'm sure the current presidential administration and D.C. in general do not want the public to be finding out about.
Yeah, I've even been on Russia Today once.
Yeah. And on top of that, it's very poignant that, you said earlier, I think it was yesterday actually, that they want to shut down the internet because they can't lie anymore, because the internet, like right after Sandy Hook, within a day or two, there was all the information coming out about how the official story was total BS, and they kept having to change the story. So I think that Larry King, who, as you pointed out, carries water for, administrations that, tend to want to lie to the American people, if you get him on RT, then he can help start, muddying the water, so to speak, putting people on there that are not the voice of reason, so to speak. We're bringing up topics that distract from the stuff that we should be all paying attention to.
Or they can simply counter the other show hosts there. I mean, one of the reasons I left Genesis Communications was that every time I would be talking on my show about Israel's actions, almost immediately the show that followed me, they would have pro-Israel guests saying, oh, this is all nonsense, he's an anti-Semite, and finally ended with Alex Jones basically declaring that anybody who was critical of Israel was a weak-minded fool. And so he started basically dissing me and insulting me on the air, and of course at that point, that's when I left, and I'm much more comfortable over here at Republic Broadcasting. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why I like Republic Broadcasting so much. I have been here so far for years. Not once since I've come on to Republic Broadcasting has anybody ever contacted me and say, don't do this story or change this story or you've got to talk about X, Y, Z. And I got to tell you, that is really an important aspect to me. And I have had other networks come in and try and lure me away from Republic Broadcasting, and I keep telling them, right here, I've got my integrity. You know, they basically say, you decide your own show and your own content. You follow your own lead, and that is so important to somebody who's involved in trying to get the truth out there. All righty.
Right. May I say one more thing?
Yeah, real quick.
Yeah, real quick. Have you heard of the video Seeds of Death?
Yes, I have. I think we linked to it a while back, but not recently.
First time this week, and what was your take on that? That it was all pretty authentic, and it was the information was could hold water, so to speak.
Yeah, I think most of it really was, and we understand this whole GMO situation is just spiraling out of control. It's proving to be a very dangerous technology, very recklessly deployed. And there's a whole new scandal up in Oregon where this GMO wheat, which is not yet government approved for sale or commercialization, has now been found to have contaminated a field in Oregon. And that's what's really dangerous about all this GMO stuff is you can't confine it to one field. Wind will take the pollen, bees will take the pollen, then they die. Birds will take the pollen. Nature does what nature does with the pollen. And, of course, Monsanto goes out and says, oh, you're stealing our patented genes. No, actually, you were not containing your product. But the courts are siding with Monsanto, and that, too, is a disaster. What they're trying to do is take Mother Nature and turn it into another privatized, for-profit operation.
Right. Yep. Kind of makes you wonder who at RT decided to hire Larry King. Back to the first point, if they had all these other credible people on there, and now all of a sudden they're reaching out and getting him. I think they have good ratings anyways. What do they need Larry King for?
Well, I think, they're trying to build their American market right now, and I think Larry King was certainly available, and he's got name value, and I think that's why they went for him, and it may backflash on them, in which case they'll let him go. But yeah, I think that one is a real head scratcher.
All right, have a great day. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Another little story about the police misbehaving. New Rochelle man killed by cop was very nonviolent. Now, in this case, it's not the police who were wrong, but apparently this artist attacked a police officer with a knife. He had just recently stopped taking antidepressive medication. Was very nonviolent, but he was on these antidepressants, stopped taking them, and we know that withdrawal is the most dangerous time. This is another violent crime linked to these medications. All right. Now, we're going to take another break for commercials. We will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're just about finishing up our program, and a reminder, I'm going to be taking over the microphone for John Stadmiller following my own show for 2 hours. We're going to keep on talking about all this kind of stuff. We're getting a story just now coming out of the Washington Times where the State Department is out there saying that Iran's support for terrorism is growing. They're trying to say, oh, bad Iran. Can we invade now? Can we invade now? And we've heard this all before, but again, common sense has to apply. Iran wants to avoid a war. They are not going to do anything that gives the United States an excuse to invade. The United States certainly has a motive for a false flag attack, a new 9/11, to blame on Iran to get that war going. So does Israel. And right now, of course, Barack Obama is desperate for some major event to take the media focus off of Benghazi Gate, DOJ Gate, IRS Gate, EPA Gate, and Fast and Furious Gate. The gates are really piling up on him right now, and he is in a desperate situation to hang on to his job. And he couldn't get an armed uprising rebellion with Adam Kokesh. So now he needs a war. And so we're back to this, oh, Iran is the threat, Iran's the danger. Folks, Iran has not invaded another country in a war of conquest in over 200 years. That's a record that the United States cannot match. And, of course, Israel can't seem to go 6 months without attacking somebody. Of the United States, Israel, and Iran, Iran is the one least likely to be starting any kind of trouble. It is not their nature. It's not their cultural identity. So if they're cranking up this thing that Iran is supporting terrorism and all the rest of it, it means they're back to thinking about a new 9/11, a big bada boom somewhere that can be blamed on Iran. You know, nuke the Golden Gate Bridge, blame Iran for it. Crash the Wall Street computers so they can transfer the blame for the destroyed economy from Wall Street onto Iran. We know we've heard all these musings about a virtual 9/11. But they're trying to sell you another war with Iran. Iran is not the problem. It never has been. The goal for the war with Iran is for Israel to get rid of a regional competitor, economic competitor, and for the U.S., it's to force Iran's oil back on the world market only for the U.S. dollars. Wall Street's agenda is to force Iran to accept private central banking. That's the war agenda. Okay, they can't tell you that. It's a dumb reason to sacrifice your children. So they're back to terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, they hate us for our freedoms, and all the same old propaganda lies they've been shoveling for the last 10 years to sell you these wars. And it's time for the American people to stand up and say, look, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, third time, fourth time, fifth time, sixth time, seventh time, shame on me. We've heard it all before, and it was all nonsense. It was all junk. All right, there's the music. We're going to take a quick break for station identification. We'll be back with John's show after these few words.